Hey guys, welcome back to Andrew Invests. If you have any American friends, you're probably painfully aware that they're paid far more than us Brits. But that's really only true for university graduates. Non-grads are paid pretty similarly across both countries. 15 years ago, UK grads earned only 8% less than their American counterparts, but now that figure has widened to being over 40%. So why is the UK falling so far behind when it comes to graduate salaries? Well, first of all, some of you might be saying, well, maybe there's a skills gap. Maybe American grads are better skilled than British grads, so they deserve to be paid more. Well, that's simply not true. Let's first of all look at university rankings. Despite being in decline in many ways, Britain still has more universities in the top global 100 than the US per capita. So that's not to blame for this. And what about the split of subjects that university students are choosing to pick up in the UK versus the US? Well, that's also very similar as well. The US has about 34% of its students picking up STEM subjects, whereas the UK has 30. So that small difference isn't enough to explain the wage gap. It might not come as a surprise to you that graduates have always been paid a premium to non-graduates. And it might also not surprise you that in the UK and the US, the proportion of graduates to non-graduates has increased over time as more people chase that premium. And when we look at a graph of the premium over the time in the UK, we can see that as the number of grads has increased, the premium that they command when it comes to salaries has decreased. That's not even to mention the fact that student loans have increased over time, which means that wages after tax have also decreased. So the premium that you get as a grad is massively less. At this point, you might be going, well, it's just simple supply and demand, right? As the number of grads increases, the salary premium that they command is going to decrease. It's just natural. But then we look at the US figures, and it completely disproves that. We can see that as the number of graduates in the US has increased over time, the premium that they command has also massively increased. It's not a zero-sum game, and more grads does not necessarily mean lower wages. Some would say America has mountains of highly lucrative and skilled jobs chasing the best candidates, while Britain has mountains of skilled candidates chasing a small number of world-class graduate employment opportunities. This has led to a situation in the UK where over a third of highly skilled graduates are working jobs that don't even require a degree. Now, I'm not shaming jobs like baristas or bartenders. These are things that need to be done. But ultimately, these graduates, if they were living in the US in the same circumstances, many of them would be on graduate salaries of over $100,000 and thus contributing far more to the tax system and the economy in general. This is a really terrible allocation of resources and skills in the British economy. So now we've established it's about demand, not supply. But why does the UK have such little demand for highly skilled graduate jobs? Well, in my opinion, there are a lot of reasons, but one of the main ones for me is a lack of innovation and a lack of entrepreneurial culture. If you look at the US, almost every single tech company in the world is American, and half of them were started in someone's basement or garage. Just look at Microsoft, Google, and so on. These companies obviously require highly skilled employees and are willing to pay a lot of money to attract them. Britain doesn't have any major tech companies other than maybe ARM, and even then it's not owned by British investors. It's been sold to SoftBank, a Japanese company. When you look at the UK, it's not only the lack of innovative spirit though, it's also a lack of capital. If you were to create a startup, you require huge amounts of money to get off your feet. And in the US, there's a huge pool of investor money, which we don't have in the UK. In fact, a lot of our investments into startups is from America, which means that when the startups are successful, the Americans reap the profit. One of the main reasons that there's such a lack of investor capital in the UK versus the US is that most people here don't like to invest into stocks and shares and view it as a form of gambling effectively. In the US, far more people are likely to keep a portion of their wealth in stocks and shares versus houses, which the UK loves, and pretty much everyone in the UK keeps most of their money in their house. This is to the detriment of the UK on the whole anyway, but there is one other source of invested capital that the UK has, and that's pension money. Now, back in 2000, defined benefit schemes had a lot of money in UK equities, but rules were changed because they wanted to de-risk, and it meant that most of these funds sold all of their equities in favor of bonds. This meant that most companies had to go cap in hand to foreign hedge funds and investors for money, and it was a massive own goal for the UK, which the consequences of which are only now being felt. The government is taking this lack of domestic investment seriously, and it is one thing that I actually support them doing despite their many other failings. They're looking at changing ISA rules in order to encourage more investment into UK equities, as well as forcing or getting pensions to voluntarily invest more money into UK startups and equities. I do think this will have some small difference in the future, but I'm not sure if it will be enough to change the structural and endemic differences between the US and UK economies. Now, changing to an innovative entrepreneurial culture is quite wishy-washy, and there's nothing really we can do to change that in the short term. But there are easier things that we can do to encourage the creation of graduate jobs. Just look at the graph of the graduate premium in the UK before. We can see that almost all of the regions have decreased over time, but in London, the graduate premium has pretty much stayed the same for the last 20 years. Now, why is that? Well, obviously, London is still one of the most attractive places in the world for companies, global companies, to put their headquarters and invest in highly paid graduate jobs. The UK has been London-centric for a long time, but that's only increased over the last few decades, and I do think a large part of that is a lack of investment in things like infrastructure in other parts of the country. If we were to improve, for example, the transport links with other cities in the UK with London, it would massively increase the attractiveness of them for international companies to open their headquarters there. Just look at the recent High Speed 2 rail failure. We paid a huge amount of money for it to be built, and now half of it is going to be scrapped. Ultimately, some people will say that the HS2 scrappage was necessary because we spent far too much money on it and we're not going to see anything in return anyway. But I think this is just patently wrong. It's not an expenditure, it's an investment. And investments always pay for themselves back in the long term in the form of productivity. When you look at the UK as a whole and exclude London, the GDP per person is actually less than every single US state, including Mississippi. That's really abysmal. London can't be the only place where graduates have good jobs, and we need to spend more money on infrastructure in non-London regions. This attitude has been pervasive in the UK government for a long time now, treating investments as expenditures that need to be paid for right now. But ultimately, investments pay for themselves in the long term, and I do think this penny pinching attitude is one that has held back the UK and the development of its economy. Even though America and the UK are very similar, maybe you think America is just the global exception. So why don't we take a look at Ireland? They're right next to us, and we even share a border with them. Traditionally, skilled people and graduates from Ireland have travelled to the UK to get better jobs and earn a higher salary. But that has now changed, with Irish graduates actually earning significantly more than British graduates. What's happened here? Ireland has attracted a plethora of US tech companies by having a very low corporation tax. And whilst we can learn lessons from that, I'm sure there are other lessons as well that they have incorporated that we should not be shy about copying. Now, overall, I do think that the reason why British grad salaries are so low is because of the lack of demand. I do have sympathy with people who think that the proportion of people doing pointless degrees in the UK is too high, and I do think the potential for more STEM degrees is needed. But overall, the real reason why salaries are low is because of a lack of demand. If you guys agree or disagree, let me know in the comments. I'm really curious to hear what you have to say. If you made it this far, please give me a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.